Hello, and welcome to our April 3rd Thursday. My name is Becca Oliver. I'm the Executive Director here at the Writers League of Texas, and we do this program every month. We bring together people we admire and folks that we know have a lot to share, and we talk about topics that are of interest to writers. So I'm excited to be here tonight with our two panelists to talk about Now Hear This, a look at audio publishing today. But before I introduce our two panelists, I wanted to tell you about a giveaway that we have tonight. The generosity of these two folks and their companies, Libra FM and Penguin Random House Audio. We're going to be giving away 5 audiobooks of James by Percival Everett. This is the book that everybody is talking about. Everybody is talking about it. And my understanding too is if you have the print book, buy the audio, get the audio. Don't buy it, get it. Have it given to you tonight because it is really wonderful. So we'll have more about that towards the end of the program, but I did want to mention it up front that a little bit later, we're going to tell you how to enter and we're going to give away 5 audiobooks. And we can't thank our amazing guests enough for bringing us this giveaway for tonight. So kind of them. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce our 2 panelists, and this is where I have to move everything around on my screen so I can read these impressive bios. Lance Fitzgerald is VP Content and Business Development for PRH Audio, leading the editorial, acquisitions, art, and licensing teams. Under his leadership, the audio editorial team has acquired Audiobook Originals from Timothy Snyder, Erik Larson, Stephen Rinella, Najwa Zebian, Kate Winkler Dawson, and others, as well as audiobook first projects from Ali Hazelwood, Brandon Sanderson, Simone St. James, and more. Prior to joining PRH Audio, he worked in Subsidiary Rights for 25 years as Subsidiary Rights Director at Crown Random House, Simon & Schuster, and Penguin Putnam. He's also been a frequent guest of us here at the Writers League for programming. In the last 10 years, he has helped ready all of our conference registrants for their pitches. He's going to do it again this June for our annual or semi-annual biennial conference that's happening June 21st to the 23rd. To know him is to love him. Please welcome Lance Fitzgerald.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be back.
And next, oh my gosh, joining us for the first time, but is someone who is never going to be able to shake us, so shouldn't even try. I'm so excited to have Mark Pearson here. Mark Pearson is the CEO and co-founder of Libra FM, the digital audiobook platform for more than 2,600 independent bookshops around the world. Prior to that, he was the publisher at Pear Press, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to ask him some questions about his amazing company and his background in audio today. So please welcome Mark Pearson. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Glad to be here. It sounds like I'm signed up for the next decade.
Yeah, we'll get back to you with all of your future obligations. So for tonight, we're going to be diving into the audio biz, and I'm so interested to hear your perspectives on a number of different topics related to the industry. But the first thing I wanted to do was to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves a little bit more in terms of your own career trajectory, what brought you to the audio business, which is hands down one of the most exciting places to be in publishing today. So what brought you to this place, and then a little bit more about your roles within your companies and what your companies do. So Lance, I'm going to start with you. And of course, Penguin Random House Audio is publishing, I believe, has over 20,000 titles that you've published in the audio space, and you do a lot of big, important books and also a lot of wonderful new debut books. So could you just take a beat and tell us about you and then also your role at Penguin Random House Audio?
Sure. I joined Penguin Random House Audio in February 2020. If you go back in the time machine, that was an excellent time to start a new role. Prior to that time, I had been a rights director for 25 years. As Becca said in my bio, I had always dabbled in audio, if you will. I think I remember as a kid, I loved the Star Wars record where they told the story of the movie, and I listened to it over and over and over again. And then as an adult, I remember going on a road trip and listening to Tina Fey's Bossy Pants and being like, I love this, and started listening to celebrity audiobooks whenever I was in the car. So when I was offered this role, which was a flip from what I used to do, I used to sell. And in this role, my team actually buys. So we acquire audio rights. We are Penguin Random House Audio. We're a team of about 100 people. We publish 2,000 audiobooks a year. The majority of the audiobooks we publish come from within Penguin Random House, and that is pretty much everything adult, middle grade, and YA that is recordable. Things like cookbooks, graphic novels, journals that are a little trickier. We're trying to record. We're having some nice successes with some graphic novels. We won the Odyssey Award last year for our graphic novel for El Defo, which is very exciting. In addition to that, my team does some licensing of our audio recordings to be used in other formats. And then we also publish Audiobook Originals, which are things which are never available in print. Erik Larson's No One Goes Alone is a ghost story that he wrote that is not available in print. You can only listen to it because, as he said, ghost stories are best told aloud. And then we also publish in the Spanish language, so kind of dabbling into other languages and expanding accessibility for all.
Nice, thank you. And we're going to dig into a few of those specific things that you just mentioned in just a little bit. So Mark, first of all, your company is employee owned and is also a social purpose corporation, which I would love for you to talk a little bit. Folks should know that. And I really hope people listening tonight walk away with an account with Libra FM if they don't already have one, because of the great work that you're doing. You do so much to support independent bookstores. So as a founder, especially, tell us your story, how you got to this cool place.
Yeah. I have a background as a book publisher. So I graduated from college, and instead of getting a job as a business consultant, I said, I want to publish a book about backpacking around Europe based on my experience studying art history in Rome. So that's what I did. And I learned a ton about book publishing and really fell in love with it. I love books. I'm a reader. I also love marketing. And so I feel very lucky that my whole career has been about those two things. And I'm still doing that today. But it looks a little different. As 10 years ago, I started Libra FM. And I saw as a publisher that my audiobook sales were growing. Personally, I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. I'm a competitive person, and I was actually losing a reading contest to a good friend of mine. And I said, this is impossible. I'm a book publisher. I should never lose a reading contest. So I would listen to audiobooks, after I would come back from a run or I'd clean the kitchen. And so that's what it took. And then I looked at the future and I saw that, these independent bookstores that I love with a passion, they were not able to participate in digital audiobooks. And at the time we started Libra FM 10 years ago, and Lance can tell you this too, is 50% of the sales were on compact disc, And so there's been a revolution in that our phones, this technology and the app-based listening has really opened up these audiobooks and made them accessible on the go for us. So that's just a little bit about it. We now work with close to 3,000 bookshops around the world. We sell in 6 currencies, and we are it's a blast. It is just so much fun to be in this audiobook world, and we will talk more about that. But that's a little intro.
And so just to stick on that for a second, stick with that. The model is, well, the way that you support indie bookstores is that through the sales of audiobooks through Libra FM, someone can designate a bookstore that they would like to support, and then a portion of the sale goes to that bookstore. Is that correct?
Exactly. So there's you can go to your local bookstore, and we work with about 90-something% of them in the United States. And it's a co-branded experience where, the email comes from Libra FM and your local bookstore. The local booksellers often help curate in the audiobooks in terms of collection and writing reviews. For example, the title James, which is our #1 bestseller across all of our bookstores. I've never seen so many reviews by booksellers who've written reviews of why the audiobook is so great and why everyone needs to listen to it right now. So, but we also have a membership. So you can buy one at a time, a la carte, but you can also become a member and get 1 credit a month and support your local bookstore. And our business is set up where we are a social purpose corporation, which means we're not trying to maximize our profit. We're trying to serve the local bookstore and share as much of that revenue as we can with them.
Yeah. Thank you for talking a little bit more about that. And I bet we'll get into it even more. So we did invite folks to share questions, and we do have some that came in through a form that we shared with the registration link. I would mention to folks who are listening in that I'm guessing you will have many questions as well. So keep in mind that there is a Q&A box on the Zoom. And if you have questions, just find the Q&A box within the webinar, drop the questions there. I know Evan's taking questions and will share them with me from YouTube. But so we've got some questions that came in. I've got questions. And I think what I want to do is divide this conversation. There's so much that we could cover, but I want to divide it into 3 parts. And the first one is to just speak a little generally about the industry today, and to talk about first, first, I'd love to touch on something that you just mentioned, Mark, and that is the way that people are getting their audios, meaning digital becoming really the primary, I believe, primary way versus the physical copies of audiobooks. And so, Lance, for you as a publisher, what does that look like? What have you seen in terms of, are there still CD versions of, is there a CD version of James that exists, or is everything really shifting into digital?
As you can see over my shoulder, I do have CDs on display. We do produce some CDs. The CD market does continue to shrink. We do not have a CD of James available. What we're doing often is adding a CD after the fact. If something's really successful, we could add a CD in. Anything, like if you think about Prince Harry or Lessons in Chemistry, I'm looking at my shelf right now, anything big we're publishing day and date. Libraries are still a big home for CDs. So that's part of the reason we continue to provide this service to libraries and to listeners. But digital is the majority of where we are seeing our sales. And I think what's convenient about digital versus a CD, digital is so much faster. It can be very hard for us to get a CD published day and date, whereas that digital is always available the day the book goes on sale.
Day and date, are you saying that's the simultaneous publication with the whatever print edition might exist?
Exactly.
Yeah,
because the way we think about it is people want to read the book in the format they like. And right now there are 3 formats primarily. There's print, there's and there's audio. And so the 3 of us are on this screen. We could all be friends. We could all want to read the same book, but we might each have a different preference of how we like that book. So we want everyone to experience it at the same time on sale.
Wow. And so I imagine for production purposes, that also just, the way the editorial process unfolds and changes that might be happening in the editorial space up to whatever point will really impact you and the ability to do that too, huh?
Yeah, we wait to record until the book is in final pass, which is typically 2 months before publication. And so that's typically when we wait to record. In certain cases, I'll use Barbara Streisand as a reference here. She went into the studio at second pass, so she could actually edit as she went through. So what we were doing is she was editing as she was reading. We were feeding that back to our managing editorial team who were able to make the corrections for the print book.
That is really cool. There's so much. We could do an entire session probably, but you should not. I don't think you'd be allowed to do that on Barbara Streisand audiobook, which is so good. But so for both of you then, let's talk about this tremendous growth in audio and what it looks like today in terms of where we are and maybe what continual growth looks like. I was reading the Audio Publishers Association. I found numbers for 2022. I don't know if they just haven't released 2023 at this point, but they said that there was an overall revenue increase of 10%, bringing the estimated industry total to 1.8 billion in sales for the year 2022, and that dipped a little bit because maybe the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, started to cool it off somewhat. But and then also interesting stats about more than half of US adults said that they had listened to an audiobook at some point. And that was a significant jump up from 45% the previous year, and that it breaks down demographically to a younger and more diverse audience for audiobooks. So those are three different things, right? There's the growth itself in the market. There's just people who are actually listening to audios, and then it's more specifically what the demographics of folks looks like and the growth there. But could you each just speak to, I think, the growth of audio today and what you see happening right now and what you see happening in the future? And Mark, I'm going to throw it to you because you, of course, are right there getting so much information as you're selling to people every day.
Yeah. Well, to frame the statistics you cited, I think it's important to start with the fact that reading itself is not a growth industry. And we have a problem in that it is not growing. And we can all be thankful for audiobooks, that audiobooks are a gateway to a life in books. And now, on one level, we can celebrate that reading hasn't dropped off a cliff, that there's books are published and people are, buying print and bookstores are hanging on, right? But I say hanging on, right? They're not thriving. They're operating on really small margins. And so this is what, why I'm in the audiobook business, right? Because it's not competing with print or ebooks. You bring audiobooks into your life, and what we know from our customers and booksellers is that there's a very strong connection with listening and doing an activity, which is not the case with the print or ebook, right? And so for me personally, and I think this explains why those numbers, why we're growing, is that my number one way right now, and it's changing, is to have a good cup of coffee in the morning and listen to an audiobook and tidy up our kitchen. Right. That brings me so much joy, right? To have that coffee, to get things organized, and to bring a book in my life in that way. And for many people, it's so interesting where you have the author Cory Doctorow. He listens to books while he's swimming. We have booksellers who have skied this winter, and they're listening to books as they go up the chairlift. Right. There's gardening. You just got to be careful not to snip, your earbuds. So this is why we're growing. And it's so exciting for me that we're doing all these activities and we're bringing books in our life.
Mm-hmm. Lance, what's your perspective on the growth in the industry?
I think people are discovering it too. I think you used to have to explain what an audiobook was, and now people know. More people know. Authors and agents are more concerned about them. I also think we're on screens all day long. Like, we're staring at a screen all day long, and I can go home at night and I can sit and I can scroll through Instagram all night, or I can pop in an audiobook and actually turn off my eyes and relax, which I think makes a big difference. There's something about listening to an audiobook that is so singular, even unlike reading a book, which is very public of what you're doing. When you're listening to that audiobook, you're in a space. And I mentioned in the pre-show, for those of you that were here, these new things that are called speaker boxes. And I think we're looking at children. We want to create a new generation of listeners, of readers. And so there are toy companies that have launched some products, which we call speaker boxes. There's one out of Germany called a Tonies, which is Tonie. And there's one based out of the UK called a Yoto, which is Yoto. And what they are, if I had extra long arms, I could grab one off my shelf and show you. It's a box with a speaker on it and no screen. And it is for children. The Tonies is a little figurine. You put it on top and it plays an audiobook, or it plays music, or it plays activities. The Yoto is a card that you slip in. And so children can have control over listening to what they want to listen to, which I think is really building that next generation of listeners. I hear from my friends who have kids, their children are addicted to their Yotos and their Tonies, and they are listening all the time, which is a great sign for the future.
So for folks who are listening in, who are writing for kids, who are in the kidlit space, and I think often I was just at the Texas Library Association conference, and I was talking to a friend of mine who just published a picture book, and she said it was actually turned into an audio. And so I'm wondering about that space, what the kidlit market looks like for audiobooks, and if there are certain sort of innovations, or I mean, you just mentioned the speaker boxes, that's a great one, but for any folks who are writing kidlit, what you're seeing is working or is in particular high demand. And I'll ask you that question first, Lance, because I'm still looking at you. But then Mark, I would love to hear your perspective on that too.
I mean, I think, we break it into three buckets. I think YA, young adult, performs like an adult book. That's that's a no-brainer. We record it. Middle grade, we started recording more and more and more now, and it's growing for us. It's kind of slow going. And then picture books are a little bit hit and miss. We definitely record some of them. We don't record all of them. However, there are also, in addition to the speaker boxes, there are things called Wonderbook and Vox, which for me reminds me as a kid of having a book and a record. That would be like Turn the Page Now, where these companies take a physical book and they put an audio player inside of it. And then you can play it, and it's available at your libraries. You can go to your library and ask about a Wonderbook. So I think that's another way to kind of meld the technologies and get kids listening. So I think for picture books, the fact that your friend had it recorded is fantastic, because I think that's the one space we haven't quite tapped in the way that we're tapping middle grade and young adult.
I'm pretty sure it was recorded, but it was also sort of incorporated into audio with video with the
Oh,
visual of the illustrations. And she said it was 7 minutes long, as a picture book would be. Mark, how about you? Is there anything that you'd want to add about the kidlit space and kids audiobooks today?
I mean, so our perspective is we want every title to exist as an audiobook, right? I think we're better for that. I do agree with Lance that for picture books, the sales they're behind in terms of the print editions, whereas maybe for the YA or middle grade or adult, you could have audiobook that's performing so well. Just digging a little deeper in terms of why. I mean, we of course have reports from parents that, I mean, they depend on these audiobooks, right? And not only in English, but also in other languages such as Spanish, right? One major benefit with audiobooks is that you can listen at a higher level than you can read, right? So parents are doing it that way. So many benefits. I also have to say, though, on the business side, that these audiobooks that you mentioned, like 7 minutes long, right? That price is going to be lower, right, than say the Barbra Streisand title. And most Libra FM is on a credit system, right? And so you may not want to use one of your credits on a book that's only 7 minutes. Instead, you would buy it a la carte. And for that reason is why some of the children's titles are, I think they underperform in terms of the market.
Right, because they're not a part of that. Yeah, every month I get that one book for X price, but anything else I have to pay additionally for. And so
Exactly.
got it. So then let's talk about other genres, because that was a big question that folks had, I think, for everyone out there who is writing and thinking about this piece of the industry, whether they're thinking about potentially an audio original or they're thinking about selling the audio rights, doing it themselves. What are you seeing in terms of genres and categories that the ones that you see as sort of perennial, they're always going to probably perform well, and then some that either are surprising you right now or maybe have started to really see some growth in terms of sales and attention? And again, I go back to that demographic stat that I was mentioning, that younger and more diverse folks listening to audiobooks. So are there particular genres, Lance, that you're thinking about today that you guys are really excited about publishing more books into?
Well, I'm going to say it, romantasy. Romantasy is the hot of the moment, thanks to things like The Fourth Wing. Um, so, we really follow our print colleagues, what is working for our print colleagues, what is selling well for them, and then those are the things that sell well for us. But also, our list is very interesting. If we look at our top 10 books for the year, 7 of them are at least a year old because people are still listening to Atomic Habits. People are still listening to The Body Keeps the Score. People are still listening to Green Lights. Like, those books have become these kind of perennial bestsellers that people continue to listen to.
Yeah, I have had Atomic Habits for quite a long time on audio, and I have listened to like a chapter every few months. So I'm like, and then I go back and start all over again because I think I really haven't nailed my Atomic Habits yet. So yeah, I mean, imagine there are some books that are just always going to perform really well, depending on where they fit into the cultural conversation too. Mark, what about you? You dropped into the chat box your bestseller. So what does that look like? Does it sort of echo what Lance said? Is there, especially we're talking indie bookstores here now, so I would imagine there might be some difference in terms of what folks are looking for.
I'm a really big fan of our bestseller list. It reflects, I think even the print sales that are happening through the indie bookstores, right? And this list is updated every hour. And out of 450,000 audiobooks, you can see the top 100 right there. And so James is number one. Congratulations, Lance.
I'm sure your list is not a source of anxiety for any authors who, like, if you're
No,
updating it
no.
every hour, you have people who are just like, it's 10:02. I've got to get over to that list.
Totally.
So, but any other sort of, I imagine more literary fiction, perhaps, or debuts on your list,
I mean, we're at a point now with audiobooks where all the genres are performing, right? I mean, maybe 15 years ago, it was like, these thrillers, suspense, and now, I mean, it's everything. It's business, it's literary fiction. I mean, it's all selling there. And even just the demographics, you mentioned sort of this younger generation. That's all true, but you know what? There's we have 80 and 90-year-olds who are listening on Libra FM and they listen every single day to audiobooks, right? It's a core part of what they do. So, yeah.
So then let's go to another topic that was mentioned earlier, and that is audio originals. And so setting aside, books that are publishing the audio edition of those books, what is happening in the audio original space in terms of what people are most interested in terms of, is that an area where you often find those lower priced audiobooks because they're shorter, more, specific or niche topics, but maybe by big name authors? What does the audio original space look like right now? Lance, I'm going to start with you.
It's a very exciting time. It's a moment of experimentation. It's an ability to try kind of things you don't want to try. And also for established authors like Erik Larson, he's like, I want to write fiction, but I'm not sure I want to publish fiction. So it's a really great experimental choice for him to make. I think the thing that people need to keep in mind if they're thinking about an audiobook original, it needs a reason. It needs a reason to be an audiobook original. There are certain agents who will sometimes submit things to me where it is very obvious that it was a print submission that they were unable to sell, because it will say things like, this book will include 20 pages of photographs. You're like, ooh, could have just taken out that one sentence. So I'm really thinking with audio in mind. When I think about someone like Stephen Rinella and Meat Eater, he wanted to tell campfire stories. He wanted to hear stories of people who were mauled by a bear or trapped in an avalanche, and like those needed to be told around a campfire. Again, it's an audio experience, and we're finding really that is what succeeds for us. Timothy Snyder wanted to write about Ukraine when the war in Ukraine started and was told by print publishers, we can't get this out quickly enough. And they turned to audio and said, and we got it out in less than 2 months. So that, I think, is the advantage. And it was him talking. So that's what we're seeing in the audio original space. We will publish in July a audio space drama by J. Michael Straczynski, who's the creator of Babylon 5 and Sense8, which is basically Top Gun in space, which he wrote as an audio drama. And so it's great. We've added sound effects. It's like being in a movie for your ears, which sounds super cheesy, but I'm going to go with it.
I think that's a great line. You should use that more often for what
Okay.
you're doing. But also, let's talk. I want to stick with that, the idea of dramatic rights, because there was, and you and I, Lance, with our like long rights backgrounds, there really was a protection of what it is, what you can do on audio versus what creeps into the dramatic space. So can you talk about that a little bit, how you navigate that and what folks might be thinking about in terms of the difference between a dramatic audio and a straightforward audiobook?
So that we talk about this a lot because there are a lot of agents and authors who are very concerned about what they call dramatic rights, then it's going to interfere with what they want to do in the film and TV space. But what our legal counsel here said very cleverly, he's like, Jim Dale reading Harry Potter, that is a dramatic reading. You would never call that drama rights. That is Jim Dale reading the book verbatim with voices. And I think that's what really makes the book pop. And I think whether it's something like Daisy Jones and the Six with multiple voices, I just finished The Book of Love by Kelly Link, where she does multiple voices in that book. It's not a dramatic
George
reading.
Saunders, I think, to
George
name a
Saunders.
Texas author, that Lincoln in the Bardo is an amazingly entertaining audiobook. And I would argue, I'm not even going to argue it. You can argue it for yourselves once you listen to the audiobook, but what a treat that audiobook is.
I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think we have 120 plus voices on that audiobook. None of those are dramatic because they are verbatim readings of the book. It is someone reading every word in the book. They just may be doing voices. I think of a dramatic version is you take that book, you strip it apart, it's dialogue, it's sound effects. It's no longer a verbatim reading of the book.
Got it. Music, other things added.
Yeah, you can add music to an audiobook too as well. Barbara Streisand, still an audiobook. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I do. I love the multicast production and, Lance and the team. I mean, they're the best in the business. I do want to throw a word of caution out to anybody just to add music for music's sake. I mean, there's a reason Barbara Streisand can pull it off, right? But we get returns at Libra FM. If a customer's not happy, and we get a number of returns where there's music that's added that really doesn't do anything to enhance the audiobook, right? It's just added music, and most people don't like that, right? So
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you, because there were questions that folks had about music specifically, beyond permissions, which of course is a whole nother conversation, but you can find music that is available to be used, and maybe you don't need to. Maybe make sure it's important for the book itself. So for folks who, and I also love, Lance, that you mentioned you can sometimes see a submission and it was submitted for audio because it didn't sell to the print side of the business. And so I do think it is nice to be moving hopefully away from that idea that, if I can't get an agent or I can't get a publisher for this, I'll do an audiobook. That this is an industry that has a lot of thought behind it, and it's not just a place to dump things that didn't actually sell in another way. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I would also, folks did have a lot of questions, if we're going to talk a little bit more about production before we move on, about things like who gets to read an audiobook and how you select the readers for your audiobooks. We'll get to the author's role in a minute and talk a little bit about whether authors should read or not. But can you talk, Lance, a little bit about the production side and give us some sense of what that looks like when you're selecting what's going to go into that particular book?
Yeah, we have a production team here at Penguin Random House of about 30 people. They are immensely talented. I will brag about them for a moment. This year they won both the Grammy for Michelle Obama's The Light We Carry and the Audiobook of the Year for Bono's Surrender. So they do fantastic recordings, and they are so mindful. They read every book. They know voices. They think about who the rate narrator for the book will be. They talk to each author. They, how do you see this book? How do you hear this book? Here's how I hear it. What do you think? And there's a lot of back and forth there, conversations about pronunciation. How do you make sure things are said right in the book? All of that happens to make sure that we are bringing the audiobook to life that author hears. We are producers. We have a whole casting department who know agents, who know voiceover. We also have a casting platform called Ahab Talent, where voiceover artists can upload their samples and say what dialects they can do and the experience that they have, and we cast from that too.
Yeah. It used to be there would be just a ton of Broadway actors, and I imagine there's still, of course, you have occasionally celebrity readers who might be either connected to the author or connected to the project in some way. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about sales. Let's talk about how what the sales outlets for audio look like, and how much of the business at this point, and Mark, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, is the subscription. Would you say subscription model for your model? How would you describe the Libra FM model? And is that a big part of the way that folks are getting their audios? When I see an audio on Spotify, what does that mean? Did Spotify pay for those rights? How's the author getting paid for that book? What are these different outlets? So I'm going to start with you, Mark, and hearing a little bit more about the model that you use and your perspective.
There's a lot I can say. It's such a big topic. I guess, yeah, tell me more in terms of where we want to take this in terms of like the advice for like a writer who wants to
just for the more general conversation about the industry. I'm just curious what are the outlets that are really important right now for sales for audiobooks, and specifically, it seems like the model that you have at Libra FM is such a cool and important model because of the support it gives to independent bookstores, but also it seems that people really appreciate the idea that they can join, pay a certain amount of money, and know that they're going to get, this great content.
Yeah. So, I think with these, streaming services like Netflix, like people are comfortable having a subscription, right? And there's some value there, and so upwards of close to 80% of our customers, they want to choose that monthly option, right? And there's a good value. They also want to support their local bookstore, but for 20+%, they say, I don't want that commitment, and I get it, right? They just want to buy that one audiobook and then come back a month later and buy another audiobook, right? And so that's why we have both, right? It's kind of whatever works for that customer. For an author, there's a lot we can say in terms of advice for them, but you want to be everywhere. I think there's a big gap right now in terms of a platform, in my opinion, that an author can use to get their book distributed. So I'm hoping some more companies step up to do that because it's tricky now as an author to navigate that, to make sure your audiobook is on Libra FM and all the other platforms.
Right. Having just one place that will send it out to all of the possible places that it could be. Would that be correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Lance, what about you? I mean, what are the sales outlets that you're seeing people finding their audiobooks at?
I think we really work in a model similar to our print. We want it in every bookstore possible. We want it in every audiobook store possible. We want it in libraries. Like, libraries for us are a huge market. We want people to be able to pick up their book from the library if that's how they like to read their books. But we also believe books have value. And so we're also, that's important for us. And so we don't feature our books on any sort of all you can listen to model, $10, $20 a month, and you can listen to all the audiobooks you want. We won't participate in that. It has to have value.
Got it. And then what about marketing? And Mark, I'm going to come back to you, and and then we're going to move on to some more author specific questions. But you mentioned that you love marketing. You mentioned that that's a part of your background. And so what are the ways that you're seeing people, whether it's publishers or audio original or indie audio publishing, the ways that folks are really finding their listeners?
Yeah. So I see that audiobooks not only is a way to reach more readers, but it can be your part of your main marketing strategy, right? In that you can create samples, you can put them on YouTube and Vimeo. We offer reviewer codes that can be used to share with influencers or reviewers at major publications, right, who are too busy to read that advanced reading copy, the ARC that's shipped to them in the mail. So they're on the go as well. So the audio is a way to deliver that. So if you want review coverage, you probably want an audiobook, right? So you could do like a sample chapter giveaway, your first chapter to hook people. I've always been about content marketing, and like let the book sell itself, rather than say, low price here, low price there, or everybody should buy my book. Just get them into the book, right? If you can get somebody to listen to a 3-minute excerpt on YouTube and they like it, then maybe they could listen to that 30-minute first chapter, and then it's my 3:30 rule, and then you got them for however long the book is, right? And to me, it's so important that you have to get people to read your book, to listen to it, and then recommend it. Like that is the best marketing. That's how that some of the titles that Lance mentioned continue to sell. Atomic Habits and Lessons in Chemistry they're great books, and then you talk about them, right? And so, but I think audio is a way to help achieve that, and it's also you reduce the friction instead of having 300 reading copies that you're shipping from your garage. Well, you can do it digitally through audio. So those are just a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I like that idea of, those snippets that you might record might also just be about promoting the book in every form that it exists in, right? And
Absolutely.
so whether you're publishing print or you're solely publishing audio, it's another way to just spread the word and also get people interested. Yeah, that's great. Lance, what about you in terms of marketing? Anything that you want to add that folks can be thinking about, the writers who are listening in, whether they have audiobooks currently or they're expecting one day to have one?
I think, leaning into what Mark said, the snippet, we do what we call audiograms, which is like a static image of the book and then a sound wave underneath it. And it's a clip from the book that you can post on Instagram or TikTok or X or whatever your preferred, Facebook, that people can listen to the book. I think is important. It's primarily just letting people know it's available. We are very cognizant of marketing all formats. So if you see an ad for a book from Penguin Random House, it will also have a picture. It'll have a picture of the book. It'll also have a picture of the audio next to it, just to let people know that it's available. Just getting the word out. But again, I'm going to echo what Mark said, give people a chance to listen.
So to talk a little bit more about how book becomes an audiobook, Lance, is your staff involved in the acquisition process? So are they thinking about the audiobook when a book is submitted to an editor at a publishing imprint within Penguin Random House? And are you in discussions at that point in terms of what you think the audiobook might do?
Yes, our editors are tasked, the print editors are tasked with getting audio rights for everything we publish at Penguin Random House, because again, we see that value of like publishing everything simultaneously together so everyone can listen. But our editors do reach out to us if they think something could really work in audio, and if they're having an author meeting or they're doing, a marketing pitch, what can you add for audio? So our team is always working on ideas to give to the print editors to help bring that book in-house so we can publish it.
And in terms of audio originals, are you open to, you do hear from agents. I assume, I'm going to make an assumption that you primarily work with agents, that you're not necessarily taking unagented submissions. But what does that look like in terms of acquiring outside of your own authors at Penguin Random House who want to do an audio original? What does that look like, acquiring someone from outside of Penguin Random House?
You are exactly right. We can't look at unsolicited submissions, so it comes in through an agent. Sometimes we have an exclusive submission that they have an audio original, and sometimes we're competing with other publishers in the original space. And it is like any other publishing acquisition with an auction, and we may win some and we lose some.
And so then when you do have, and apologies, Mark, I'm just going to get into I'm doing these sort of publisher focused stuff here, but when you do have an audio that you know you're going to be producing for a book that is also being published in other formats, or an original, how involved is the author in that process? And also from things like having approval over the reader and other questions like that, wanting to read themselves, what does that look like? So let's just start there. The reader piece of it, I imagine there are a lot of authors who say, I want to read my audiobook. And what does that look like in terms of how you work with the authors in that case? And then also potential approval over either reader or other things for the audio.
Yeah, happy to talk about this. I'm going to bring Mark in too, because I'm sure he also has opinions from his customers. Reading an audiobook, I'm going to say this, is not fun. It is very, very hard work. You are sitting in a room, you are reading the same sentences over and over, your stomach is growling, your mouth is dry. By the end of that period, your voice is hoarse. And it's not like if your audiobook is 5 hours long, it's not 5 hours in the studio, it's 2 to 3 days of reading that audiobook. So I think before you think, I want to read my audiobook, keep that in mind. My colleague says, she can do her own taxes, sure, but she can also pay someone to do her taxes and know they'll do a better job. And that's often how I feel about an audiobook, particularly for fiction. I don't recommend that authors really ever read their own fiction. I think a professional actor can do, as I was saying earlier, January Lavoie, who does the voices in the Book of Love, she has a different voice for every character. Jim Dale has a different voice for every character. That's what you want. You want to be able to tell that story. In the nonfiction space, if it's a memoir and you are a decent speaker and think you have the energy to do it, you are probably the right person to tell that story. But again, if I think about someone like Tara Westover, an educated, she did not read her own audiobook. And I think that's something else to keep in mind. So the stats from the APA is 50% of people like an author reading their own work. So half the people like it, half they don't. But Mark, I'm sure you have data and facts from your people too.
Yeah, I mean, the author narrating their own book it's high risk, high reward. I mean, some of my favorite books are narrated by the author, but you're also like on a tightrope, really. It's a big risk to do it yourself. And there's kind of no going back when you're in that studio and you produce it. It's hard probably to turn around and then like, okay, I'm going to hire a professional to do it. Like you're almost stuck with it. So think carefully before you just jump into it.
And then go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say a great example of that is my Libra FM purchase from the fall was Britney Spears. I was like, I want to listen to the Britney Spears book. And Britney reads the introduction to that book. It's not easy to listen to. And then Michelle Williams comes in and she reads a beautiful version of that book. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Like, love Britney. She couldn't read that book. Michelle Williams does an excellent job.
I think there's a great story around the Keith Richards memoir and the narrating there too, but I don't know it well enough to share it here, but it involves Johnny Depp and leaving the studio halfway through. So what about authors having just approval over that piece of it? My friend Stacey Swan, whose audio was published by Random House, received a couple of examples of narrators that you were considering. So what does that look like for the writers in the room? What can they expect when they're at that stage?
I think each publisher does a little bit differently. And we really like the author's input. I personally try to shy away from the word approval because I think approval is it puts the power in one person's hand. I like to use words like consultation, meaningful consultation. I like a collaborative word because what you want to do is you want to work together with your producer to find the right voice for your book so that you're all working together. And I think, Olympus, Texas, again, is an excellent audiobook. And Stacy wrote a great book. And I think that is a perfect melding where Stacy worked with her producer to find the right book. That's the way Penguin Random House works. I can't speak to how other audio publishers work, but we work very collaboratively with the author, but not trying to have one person have approval over the other. You want to work together.
So, Mark.
I can just add, some other publishers, and often they may share, 3 to 6 sample, a narration of their work and get the feedback from the author, right? But
yeah, the word approval is usually not a word that really happens in publishing, like that often meaning.
Any similar story with the cover design, right?
Right,
Authors are consulted, but it's rare where they can just tell the designer, here's what I want, and this is it,
Or
Stacey,
say, no, I don't want that.
Stacy and I had actually talked about this at one point too, and she had a great line that was like, you don't actually have to listen to it if you're unable to come to terms with the narrators, because at the end of the day, we at Penguin Random House are a business. And what we want to do is we want to sell as many audiobooks as possible. We want to sell as many print books as possible. So we don't want to slap an ugly cover on it that's not going to sell. And we don't want to do a terrible narration. So we're really working to sell as many as we can. And Stacy was like, you have to look at the cover. You don't have to listen to the audiobook.
Yeah, and it's just that partnership piece of it, right? So let's, for the folks in the room who are already or are considering doing it themselves, which absolutely it feels like, especially with the move to really with digital dominating the industry, with the ability to record a little more easily these days than it was 5-10 years ago. What are the tips that you would give for folks who are going to indie publish their own audiobooks, whether it's in terms of production value, some of the places, if you're aware of platforms or ways that folks are doing it these days, and then anything else that you'd like to touch on. But we'll start there. We'll start with production value or the way that you might approach actually creating that audiobook. And Mark, I imagine that you see a good number. I would assume that Libra FM has some indie audiobooks, but if that's not the case, let me know that too. But what are you seeing in terms of self-publishing or doing it yourself audios?
Yes. So we have more than 450,000 audiobooks. So we have plenty of books that are self-published and different ranges of quality of production, right? So, I mean, you want to work with professionals who have a track record, and whether, again, that's a narrator that you pick or production studio who can deliver a quality, end product. Very important. I just don't want any author to go through all of this work and then, I mean, it's not going to sell because of the production quality, right? So, but there are professionals, there's consultants, who can help you put all the pieces together, for sure. But there's actually, if you have a friend who say is a podcaster, I mean, there is a possibility that they could help you, produce a good quality audio file, right? And be that producer for you.
Yeah, thank you. And Lance, what are your tips for folks who are going to do it themselves?
I would just, similar to what Mark said, make sure, listen to the work that company does and see how it sounds. And also similar as you would do with an indie print publisher, read your contract very carefully, know what you're getting into, know what your rights are, what happens at the end of that contract, just so you know exactly what you're getting into.
So in terms of other ways that authors might be involved with audio, are there certain things that you see authors doing themselves? We touched on some marketing stuff, right? But are there other ways that you see authors getting involved with the publishing of their audiobook in terms of ways that they help you, Lance, do your job that might be helpful for folks to hear?
Just drive people to the audiobook. Let them know it exists. Let them know you love it. Mention it every chance you get. I think it's just great to remind people that it is available. It is another format of the book that they can get to. I think part of the reason Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights sells so well in audio is he never stopped talking about that audiobook. He was always out there talking about the audiobook. So, if you're not Matthew McConaughey, but you're at a dinner party with friends, say, hey, I wrote a book, you can get it at Book People, but you can also download it from Libra FM and listen to it there.
It's true. There is such a focus on the print. If it's happening in print simultaneously, we tend to really, as authors, in terms of touring and other things, focus on the print edition. Mark, do you have any other?
Yeah, I do want to add to that in that, I'm of course day in day out in the audiobook world, but and even though I'm sure all the participants on this call have heard about the success story of audiobooks, I did an audit of author websites about 6 months ago, and I was surprised how few authors actually link to an audiobook. It's just whatever reason, just so print focused, right? And so yeah, link everywhere, link to the audiobook platforms, link for print and ebook and so forth. So yeah.
It's a great reminder for the folks who are listening and are working on their own websites, building their own websites, thinking about what they're going to feature and talk about. For sure. So let's talk about the two letters that came up a few times in the questions, and something that we're all either talking about or hearing other people talk about these days. And that is, I'm going to say it, guys, AI. So it occurs to me that AI is probably impacting your industry in the same way that it's impacting so many other folks in their industries. So can you speak to specifically what AI looks like right now for audio and what you see happening, how people are using it, and also what you see in terms of the positives that could be coming out of AI for audio? So Mark, I'm going to start with you.
All right. It's such a big topic, one that I find fascinating. Maybe I'll touch on a couple things and then we go deeper. So I guess on one level, there's the content of a book itself, which, there are AI programs that could just write the book for you. So you don't even have to, well, actually, you should still be a member of the Writers League of Texas, but, a book could be written for you, right? And then you know what? You don't even have to show up at a studio. There's one, I think it's Rachel says that spent 3 days in the booth. Well, you could use an AI narrator and not have to show up at a booth and drink tea and so forth, right? Now, we can talk about, is that good or is that bad and all this stuff, but that's the reality, is that one could do that and go down that path. The other thing that's happening, we're seeing, it's a concern, is that, that you can train AI on a book and produce a summary. And then you could also have an AI narrator read that summary. And unfortunately, people are just dumping audiobooks out there into the marketplace. And so we've had to take steps to find those audiobooks, to make sure our customers aren't getting them. So there's a lot of shenanigans happening in this whole AI world out there right now. Today's news was that HarperCollins, one of the largest publishers in the United States here, is going to produce AI narrated voices for foreign languages. And to me, that's where this gets super interesting, right? And they clearly say that they're going to produce human narrated books, and that will be in English. But then you think about countries like Iceland. I think there's 300,000 people in Iceland. How much would it cost to produce 2,000 audiobooks a year in the Icelandic language? And finding the narrators to do that, I mean, it's the cost is enormous for, like, what's the market in Iceland of 300,000 Icelandic listeners and speakers, so forth, right? So it'd be interesting to see what they didn't say in the press release is how many languages are they going to do? Are they going to do 150 languages, for every audiobook? I don't know, but that's, to me, what is the interesting debate over our future is, should we go down that path? And there you go. That's a little tease.
So Lance, I'll throw it to you because of course international rights is a big part of your career. And so and thank you, Mark. That was great. Like you gave us three, I think, three or four very specific ways that folks are using AI. And I want to dig into a couple of them for sure, because I imagine people who are listening are interested in this topic. But Lance, what about that question of a way to translate easily with AI?
I mean, I think international rights, we're sitting on a lot of unexploited rights. So, we at Penguin Random House may hold world rights to a book that were sold in 4 countries. There are, hundreds of other languages that you could publish that book in. So then it just becomes a question of equity. What makes, a human recorded book different than an Icelandic recorded book with a synthetic voice? And is that equitable to the Icelandic people that they're listening to a synthetic voice? So getting into all the ethical murky territory, or you could say it's accessibility. Now they have access to that book that nobody else had. So it's a very curious time. I think it's an interesting time. I think it's a great time to sit and watch and see kind of what unfolds. I do think, particularly in the English language, we've been talking a lot. We're not doing any synthetic voice recordings at this point. We published one book called The Coming Wave, where the author wrote the first chapter using Chat GPT. So we recorded that first chapter using a synthetic voice. And then the rest of the book is recorded in English because that was the perfect use for it. So if an author is like, I would like to use artificial voice, synthetic voice for my book, we will talk to them about that and explain the pitfalls, because it's very good technology. It's not quite good for a whole book yet. I listened to an entire book and it was a little disconcerting by the end of it. So it's an interesting time in the industry to watch.
It occurs to me too that could that be a way to do some of the front matter, back matter of books? If you were to include that, would it be the sort of thing that you wouldn't necessarily pay a narrator to read, but might be easy to whip up synthetically?
Yep, all questions and discussions we're having. But I think AI is scary for people. And I think, we all need to remember that we use it every day already. It's autocorrect when you're typing something. It is, Waze or the GPS in your car. You're using AI already. It's just kind of defining which you're comfortable with and which you're not.
Well, and Mark, you brought up folks who are just putting out a lot, whether it's already existing books that aren't in audio and they're letting AI read and create those audios, or any number of other things that maybe are more damaging to the industry and not, or even to the authors and not positive. And I think of the way that a lot of literary journals are receiving submissions that are just whole cloth AI generated stories, and it's sort of swamping them right now in terms of what they're able to really read and weed through to get to the stuff that is human created. So it is an interesting time, right? And I like the idea of sitting back and watching and seeing how things unfold a little bit, but also being curious, right? So what else in addition, and then we're going to get to questions from the audience, but are there other ways that you see this industry changing in the next year, in the next few years? What are you excited about, or do you imagine for audio publishing as it continues to grow, as it continues to be such an important, big part of the way that we consume books, the way we introduce young readers to books, the way that we get our entertainment? Is there anything, I know I'm putting you on the spot, so I'm talking a little longer as I ask this question to let you think about it a little bit, but what beyond the AI of it all, technology that's come around, beyond the speaker boxes that Lance mentioned, stuff that that's just percolating for the audio industry? Lance, is there anything that you are particularly excited about?
I'm just excited to continue watching the growth. I think, audiobooks, as I said earlier, people used to not care and now people care, which is very exciting. People are focused on it. I think as we continue to just publish more books, and when you can read or listen in any format that you want, is a very exciting time to be in publishing and see what's happening? It's a terrible non-answer, but even as you were talking, I was trying to think of an answer and I just couldn't get there apparently.
Mark, what about you?
I think to start, the answer to the previous question is the quality of the book. I see the bar even rising in the future, and that for it's different. So if you're listening to maybe your first audiobook, your second, but if you've been a Libra member for several years, you know the narrators and you are highly discerning about the quality. And so I think publishers have to, and this is happening. We're seeing just better quality audiobooks. And so that's exciting too, is that it's a great product and time to be listening. The other part I like as well is that, more audiobooks are getting produced, and I want to see the independent publishers produce more audiobooks on their own. And in the past, they would blindly license, really, and they didn't have the in-house production or wanted to spend the time to produce their audiobooks. And I want to see them take more control and promote in and print and audio, and that's happening. But there's still a ways to go.
Why do you think that is lagging behind?
One reason is that it was easy money for many years just to, sign that agreement and get a check, right? And then a lot of the subsidiary rights people looked great doing that. But it also, as we talked about, it's hard work to produce an audiobook, right? And it's costly. The rates for quality narrators could be from $200 to $400 per finished hour. So your book is 10 hours. You're looking at 2,000 to 4,000 minimum, and maybe extra more for the production and the cleanup, right? So you have to, there's publishers that it's just a lot of money to invest, and they have to look at what's the return they're going to get on that. So that is another reason. And of course, just like in other industries, publishers are working so hard to get the print book out the door, let alone, invest in new team members who have audio experience, and it's difficult to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So turning to some of the sort of building on that conversation about indie publishers or smaller publishers and the way that audios are those rights being exploited by the folks who are actually creating the content or publishing the original format print. We do have a couple people who have questions for you, Mark, about, and if there's a place on your website you want to point them to. I don't want to have you put you on the spot with too many specific questions, but there are people curious about learning of how they can get their books up on Libra FM. The best way to, if you're an indie author and you're publishing your own audiobook, be available on Libra FM.
Yeah. So I will tell you the options that are out there, but you all have to do your own research, right? And so you can search online, and there's criticisms of the companies I'm mentioning, I have to say, right? But so one would be Authors Republic, is a platform that you can go to. Another is Findaway Voices, which is Spotify. And there's also, for authors, I highly recommend Ingram Spark for print. They currently don't offer an audiobook distribution. They do have what they call Core Source Plus at Ingram for smaller publishers or authors with multiple titles, but they currently don't have like a one-off self-publish option there. But it is a great service for print, for self-published. So those, I think, are the main, distributors that would be open to working with self-published authors. And if you work with them, then your titles will be on Libra FM and available through all of our bookstores globally.
Got it. Lance, is there any other sort of advice you give to indie authors who are looking to get their audiobooks out in the world?
No, I think Mark has covered it really well.
Yeah. And then what about, someone's asking about Posotron, which I'm going to say I don't know Posotron. So I don't know if either of you is familiar with it. Sounds like it might be something regarding prepping audiobooks for narration. So we'll pass them over to doing some digging for themselves. What about price? Is there anything I know we talked a little bit about it with regards to thinking about the memberships or subscriptions, but are you seeing folks experiment with price in the audiobook space? Is price fixed? So if you publish, Lance, an audiobook at X price, does it stay that price for the life of that audiobook, or is there fluctuation? What is the price piece of this game look like?
We set a price, and then our retailers like Libra FM are allowed to set the price that they want for that audiobook. So it's different than a print book, which has the suggested retail price on it. The suggested retail price is blind to the consumer, but then the platform can price it however they wish.
Oh, interesting. And anything you want to add about pricing at all, Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, you can go to platforms and see what the price is, and generally it tracks with how many hours the title is, and so then you could come up with what you think is a reasonable price for your title based on that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to see if there are any other questions in here that we're going to have time for, because we're almost out of time. And I'm not seeing that much more than folks who are sort of talking about getting their books out and distributed, which we've really touched on. So the last question that I have for you two is, as folks who are so just knowledgeable about this industry, listening to those audiobooks while you're cleaning that kitchen, listening to those audiobooks while you're flying to the Bologna Book Fair. Let's just leave folks here with a recommendation or two. What is something in audio that you've really loved, and maybe give us a sense of why you loved it and what made it special for you? So I'm going to start with you, Mark.
All right. I'm going to share a link because I can do that. So there are just so many books, but a friend of mine wrote this book called I've Never Thought of It That Way, which has been a bestseller. And she ended up narrating the book herself. And she's absolutely the best person to narrate this book. But it's about how to be curious and how to have these difficult conversations in polarized times. And so it's really helpful for me. And like I said, she did a great job with the narration. It's very conversational and brought it to life.
Yeah.
That's just one. I could go on and on, so I'll stop there.
No, that's great. And you know what? You're a good friend for helping to sell also.
You know
your
what? That's what friends
book.
do in this book world.
Lance, what about you?
I just finished yesterday. We're publishing on May 7th, and I'm absolutely thrilled we're publishing an audio Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which has been the most banned book for the last 3 or 4 years, has been turned into a fantastic audio. Maya's pronouns are EA air. A narrated her own part in the book, as well as there are multiple voices, there are sound effects, there are music. It is, again, to be cheesy, a movie in your ears, and it is fantastic. And I'm really excited that we're publishing that on May 7th. It's great.
And I love that you're bringing that out and that it hadn't existed in audio and you found it and were able to create what sounds like a really special audio edition. And I am just curious, do you do that often? I imagine this was a book that was also in the news and folks were talking about the need for it, but do you look in the backlist very often and say, what haven't we done in audio? What should we pluck from previous lists that just never made it into audio? And then also it seems like something folks are doing more and more, which is redoing an audio with a new narrator, perhaps. I was first introduced to Libra FM because I purchased Annie Lamott's Bird by Bird, but it was a new edition of Bird by Bird read by Annie Lamott, which is wonderful. And I bought it from you, Mark. So do you do that very often, Lance?
But it's funny you bring up Annie Lamott, because Annie came to us with that idea where she was like, I would like to re-record Bird by Bird. And we're like, absolutely. Like, that was the perfect reason to do that. So there needs to be a reason, I think, is the good reason to record. You will remember in the Wayback Machine for years, everything was published abridged, which meant a shorter version because it had to fit on a bunch of cassette tapes. So we're often looking at the abridgments and thinking, let's re-record this as an unabridged. People want the entire book now. For something like genderqueer or other graphic novels take a lot of effort. They take a lot of work and you want to make sure you get it right. So those are ones we don't necessarily do simultaneously with the print. We wait to see, is this really going to grow? And so then we will record it. There's a middle grade graphic novel series called The Witches of Brooklyn that we have just acquired and will be recording and publishing. So we are looking at the backlist. The good news is we've published most of it on audio at this point, but there are some things that need a little refresh.
So, Lance, will you name the book again that you just named that you're very excited about? And Mark, you name your book too, because we have a question and it's not specific.
Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe.
Maya was on one of our programs, actually, here at the Writers League of Texas. So perfect. All right. So before we conclude this magical evening, I want to say again, a huge thank you to our two panelists who have a giveaway for all of you. Have either of you, I'm assuming one or both of you have listened to the audiobook of James. Would that be correct?
I have not yet, but it's on my
I have not yet
pile.
either.
Well, you're the only ones because it's setting the world on fire. But literally, this book by Percival Everett, who is such a cool writer, such an important writer in our times, but also just so inventive and interesting, has written a novel that no one can stop talking about. And we have 5 of those audiobooks to give away to folks tonight. So the way it's going to work is we're going to drop links both in the YouTube chat and then also here in our chat box so that everybody gets a shot at it. Fill out this very easy breezy form. We won't close it until tomorrow morning. And you're just going to give us your name, your email. We gave you a little question to answer, and we're going to randomly select 5 people. So I hope everyone will grab that form from the chat box. I want to say again, thank you so much for your generosity. I also want to thank Mark for the additional generosity of offering a new member benefit to our Writers League of Texas members, which is a one-time audiobook credit at Libra FM. So you'll be hearing more about that from Evan Parks, who tells you all the good news for members, but that's coming up. And just so kind of you to offer that, and also to both of you for giving us your time tonight. I can't thank you enough. You are doing amazing work, and it really is such a cool part of the industry. And to hear you talk about it has been a real pleasure. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me and having Mark, I guess.
Nice.
You're welcome. Thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thank you to the folks on YouTube. Thank you to everyone in the audience. Be sure to fill out that form, get your free audiobook. We're going to send it out to you. You're going to listen to that one, and then you're just going to want to keep buying them if you're not an audiobook reader, listener already, because it is a movie in your ears. Which is a perfect way to conclude tonight's program. So thank you again, Lance and Mark, and thank you to all of you and to our Writers League staff, and have a great night.